For decades, military historians and geopolitical analysts warned us about the tripwire in the Middle East. We spent years analysing proxy militias, cyber attacks and covert assassinations, wondering what it would be like if a shadow war between Israel, the United States and Iran were to spill out. Well, as of right now, into May 2026, we don't have to wonder about that anymore, because unfortunately it is the reality of our world. On February the 28th, 2026, a web of deterrence snapped. The Middle East plunged into a direct, devastating regional war. The geopolitical chessboard didn't just shift, it was flipped over. Now today we're going to look at the exact timeline of how this shadow war began and started, the catastrophic global fallout that we're currently living through, and why the fragile current ceasefire of May 2026 might just be the quiet before the storm. Welcome to Good Night with History, and let's look at the right now. Operation Epic Fury began from the skies. Following years of escalating tensions over Iran's rapidly advancing nuclear program and the complete collapse of the diplomatic negotiations, the United States and Israel calculated that the time for talking was now over. And so on February the 28th, a joint military offensive condemned Operation Epic Fury was launched. Now, this wasn't just a surgical strike on an empty warehouse. This was an extraordinary large coordinated assault targeting Iranian military assets, nuclear facilities, and the absolute core of the Islamic Republic's leadership. The opening salvo achieved something many thought impossible, or at least unthinkable. It resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Now, in military terms, this is known as a decapitation strike. The goal was to induce the regime change and shatter Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. But a strike of this magnitude against a sovereign nation of over 80 million people doesn't happen in a vacuum. It forces a reaction, and that reaction was pretty much immediate. Now, for years, Iran had been building what strategists call the essential ring of fire, a heavily armed network of proxies, militias surrounding Israel and the US interests inside the Middle East. Now, the ring was activated. Iran unleashed a torrent of hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of military drones. They didn't just target Tel Aviv and Israel military installations. The retaliation spread across the entire Middle Eastern region. US military bases housing American forces were struck. Civilian and military locations in Arab Gulf states were devastatingly hit. Even UK bases in Bahrain, Qatar and Cyprus came under fire, forcing the British RAF into an active defensive combat. And also close by in nearby Lebanon, Hezbollah intensified its intensive operations, drawing the Israeli military into a ground offensive in southern Lebanon. The Houthis in Yemen fired ballistic missiles in solidarity. Now, within days, this conflict had metasized. It was no longer a targeted operation. It was a completely multi-front, multi-nation war. Thousands were dead. Millions were displaced. But to truly hurt the West, Iran knew it had to target something far more vulnerable than a military base. It had to target the global economy. Now, if you look at the Persian Gulf, at the bottom lies a narrow 21-mile wide waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20 to 30% of the entire world's daily oil passes through this exact checkpoint. Now, in response to the US and Israeli strikes, Iran effectively shut this strait down using sea mines, coastal defenses and naval blockades. They ceased almost all commercial shipping. The US responded with a counter-blockade, targeting ships heading to Iranian ports. Now, the global reaction here was nothing less than catastrophic. We're feeling it right now across the world. We experienced a massive global energy shock. Oil prices skyrocketed. Supply chains crashed. In the United States, budget airlines like Spirit Airlines completely collapsed under the weight of surging fuel costs, leaving tens of thousands jobless and completely stranded. The 32 members of the International Energy Agency were forced to release 400 million barrels of emergency oil just to try and stabilize the widespread panic. Iran proved that while they might not match the US in sheer air power and domination, they do hold the power to suffocate the global economy at its will. And so in phase 4, May of 2026, the current reality, where do things leave us standing today? Well, we're currently sitting in the uncomfortable, terrifying silence of a fragile ceasefire. After 5 weeks of brutal fighting, a temporary truce was broken in Islamabad in Pakistan. But as we know too well, a ceasefire isn't really peace. It's just a slight pause, if you will, interval, a reload. And right now, the United States and Iran are locked in a high-stake game of brinkmanship. Iran proposed a 14-point war-ending plan. The US President Donald Trump publicly rejected it, stating that Tehran was demanding terms he could never agree to. The US wants Iran's highly enriched uranium completely neutralized to destroy any chance of them having a nuclear weapon, and Iran wants absolute sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz recognized. And as you can imagine, neither side is willing to blink. Now, meanwhile, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, has publicly warned that they are fully prepared to resume the war if diplomacy does fail. Now, inside Iran, the regime is indeed weak after the war, struggling with a fractured economy, internal protests, and many other things. But they have transferred power to the Ayatollah's son, consolidating their hardline stance. And perhaps the most tragic casualty of this border war is again the Gaza Strip. With the entire world's attention focused on the clash between Israel, Iran and the US, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has completely overshadowed. International pressure for a resolution there has now vanished, currently leaving millions in a deteriorating, very distressing nightmare. So, we often study history as if it's a distant thing of the past. We look to the build up to World War I or World War II and think, well, how did they not see this coming? But this is really what it looks like when you see it through. It looks like the rising fuel prices. It looks like frantic meetings in foreign capitals. It looks like ceasefires that everyone knows are hanging by a thread. Now, as we sit here, the pieces are still on the board and the missiles are still in their silos. The shadow war is currently on a pause. The open war is also on a pause. And what happens next will define the rest of the 21st century. So we currently wait and see really what happens next. If you want to keep making sense of the history that is unfolded in the past and is unfolding in front of us right now, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and I will see you on the next video.